Progress with China coming out of the G20 summit.
He said, quote, China has agreed to reduce and remove tariffs on cars coming into China from the U.S.
Mexican officials are in Washington this morning to work out a solution to the migrant crisis at the border.
The agreement the administration wants to get is that these migrants will continue to stay here in Mexico while they play out their asylum.
Former FBI Director James Comey has withdrawn his motion to fight a House subpoena for a private deposition.
This is Sully, the president's service dog. He got this dog after former First Lady Barbara Bush passed away. That dog keeping watch over his master one final time, the caption reading, "Mission complete."
It's final goodbyes to George Herbert Walker Bush, America's 41st president.
All right, hours from now, the casket of George H.W. Bush will arrive in Washington, D.C. It'll lie in state at the Capitol Rotunda. The body of the late president then will be flown there on Air Force One, provided by President Trump.
Look at this. It's a heartbreaking picture that we want to show you of his beloved service dog, who he named Sully, refusing to leave his side at the funeral home.
Yeah, Jim McGrath put that out as his longtime aide. He's been with him forever and took that picture and sent it out to everybody.
And the president's request was, when I pass away, I want my service dog to go to another family in need. So that's where the dog will go.
The dog is going to go to Walter Reed in suburban Washington, D.C. Anyway, it has been a momentous weekend. You've probably seen a lot of tributes to the former president. Casey Steele is live in Houston right now with how the late president will be honored throughout this week. Casey?
Good morning to you guys. Everything is going to start right here where we are located, which is the funeral home back here, and the family is going to be meeting here a little bit later this morning, and then they will escort the flag-draped casket carrying the former first president over to Ellington Field, where it will be loaded up onto Air Force One and flown a special mission today over to D.C. Look at this powerful image again. We're talking about this all morning, sent out by the president's office last night, showing the president's service dog Sully keeping watch. The caption reading, "Mission complete." Here's Neil Bush, one of the president's sons, reflecting on his father's storied life.
He's had such an incredible impact, not because he's a lecturer or because he, is trying to tell us how to behave, but because he led such an amazing life as a role model. He's probably the best man I know in terms of everything you would want in a man. He was a great husband, an amazing dad.
Later today, the former president will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol and all day tomorrow through Wednesday morning. Wednesday, then, the National Day of Mourning, and the state funeral will be held at 11 o'clock Eastern Time at the Washington National Cathedral. From there, it is back to Texas, where Mr. Bush will lie in repose at St. Martin's Episcopal Church around the corner from us here in Houston. And then there will be a second funeral service at that church Thursday morning before the president's body is finally taken by train from here up to his presidential library and museum in College Station, Texas, where he will be laid to rest next to his beloved Barbara and their daughter Robin, who died of leukemia at a young age. Back to you guys.
Thank you, Casey. He was a wonderful man, loved Texas. I lived in Texas for a short period of time, and in that state, I mean, the Bush family, they are royalty. He lived in Massachusetts. He was born in Massachusetts, went to Yale, wanted to get in the oil business, and so he moved his family to Texas, and that's why they love that state so much. They've been there because they're there because of him. And the Houston Texans, they honored him in a moment of silence when they played the Browns this weekend, and they beat the Browns.
Yeah, indeed. He made his fortune in Texas, but he found that he was more interested in public service, and that was after he was a combat war hero. He lied about his age after Pearl Harbor to enlist as a Navy pilot. Famously, after about 4 or 5 dozen missions, was shot down in the Pacific, and as luck would have it, a U.S. sub came to his rescue, and there was somebody with a camera on the bridge of the sub, took that image, and that forever etched the service, the military service of George Herbert Walker Bush in the minds of Americans.
Yeah, I mean, he pops out of the water. He says he's sitting there on a raft. He jumped out. Everybody else in the plane died. And out of nowhere, a periscope pops up. It's an American submarine out of nowhere, and it brings him in. And even at that time, to think there would be somebody with a camera to tape it, the future president of the United States, changed the course of America. Had he not survived, we wouldn't have had a Bush 43, obviously. There would have been a different president during that time, a different vice president, and everything else that he accomplished. But looking back, it's clear that him and James Baker, as you look at and read the biographies on his life, indispensable to each other. They became tennis partners by chance, and they were best friends. And then he dragged James Baker into politics to help him get over the death, the tragic death of his wife to cancer. He said, just come join me. He said, I'm a Democrat. Don't worry about it. We'll change that. He did change that. He got involved. So James Baker would, I guess they got the sense amongst the family, hadn't eaten for the last 3 days, that this could be it. So James Baker went over, because he lives the closest, one of the other reasons, to be with George Bush, which turned out to be his last day. In the morning, he was eating. He had three meals. He seemed to be getting a second wind. Then he got a call. It looks like things have gotten bad. Jim, you should get over here quickly.
Yeah, he said when he died on Friday, it was a very sweet day. And he said his last words were said to his son, Bush 43. Listen.
The last words George Bush ever said were, I love you. And he said those words to 43, President George Bush 43, who had called in to say, Dad, I love you. I will see you on the other side. And President Bush said, I love you. And those were his last words.
You can really tell that that's hard for him to say. Mr. Baker and Mr. Bush came together at the country club because they both played doubles tennis, but they didn't have partners. And that is what started a lifelong friendship. And then, of course, George Herbert Walker Bush made him Chief of Staff, Secretary of the Treasury, and Secretary of State. And he was there from the beginning, and he was there at the end.
And he was there to get George Bush past the Al Gore impasse, and he led the legal team. And as you know, in Florida, when everything went awry, he put it back on course, and President Bush, the 43rd President of the United States, would go into the Oval Office. Meanwhile, when the president did go into the Oval Office, he leaned on another guy for a little help, and that was his dad. He also taught him a lot about taking that office, although didn't tell him what to do. Listen.
The mission was not George H.W. Bush. The mission was, how do we serve the United States? How do we help the United States? How do we make the United States better? Which is very important in establishing a culture that can succeed. And it's really one of the most important things for Americans to understand. Dad taught me this, and therefore one of the jobs is to strengthen the institution of the presidency, bring honor to the office. And that, clearly, George H.W. Bush did.
When he won in 2000, they became the second father-son pair to serve as president. The other was John Adams and John Quincy Adams. He goes on to say in that interview on 60 Minutes, he said, it was such a profound moment when I became president, and Andy Card, who was his chief of staff, took him down to the Oval Office, and they sat, in the Oval Office for his first time as president, and his dad walked in. And when his dad walked in, Bush, the son, said, Mr. President, welcome. And his dad said, thank you, Mr. President.
Right, and Andy Card set that up, too, because he told the dad to walk down and meet him after he sent there the first time. Right. The big difference with Ainsley is John Quincy Adams and John Adams were both one-term presidents. And for George W. Bush to get that second term that his dad couldn't get, he was determined to do that, not to outdo his dad, but not to outdo his dad, but just to do what his dad wasn't able to do.
Now, here's something you may not have realized, and that is from the age of 18, when he first joined the Navy, George Herbert Walker Bush kept a running diary for 57 years, and excerpts from the diary and letters were used in the book. All the best. There was a video series that has been released by 41's Foundation, and here is George Herbert Walker Bush himself talking about how he wished he could stop the aging process.
Dear kids, this letter is about aging. Last year, there was only a tiny sense of time left, of sand running through the glass. I want to put this aging on hold for a while now. I don't expect to be on the A-team anymore, but I want to play golf with you, and I want to fish or throw shoes, and I want to rejoice in your victories, and I want to be there for you if you get a bad bounce in life, and no doubt you will, for the seas do indeed get rough. If you need me, I'm here. Devotedly, Dad.
How great is that? And that was the first video produced by the foundation based on his diaries and his letters from September 1998.
To have that much of an impact. Life is so short, and you hear that, his voice, my gosh.
Takes you back.
Yeah, God, we're all parents. We all can relate to that, and the legacy we want to live for our kids. The video there you're seeing was Walker Point. That's in Kennebunkport, Maine, which is their vacation spot. And you can actually go there and take pictures with the house in the background. We've done that as a family. And he was very involved with the Episcopal Church there, St. Anne's, and you can go there to that church, and they have service outside, so the water is on the other side of the minister while he's preaching, and they were very involved in that church and their church in Houston as well.
Meanwhile, Carly Shimkus was talking about that a short time ago. You were co-anchoring this morning. Great job.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Hey, good morning, guys. And we begin here with a Fox News alert. A senior leader of ISIS involved in murdering a former U.S. Army Ranger is now dead. U.S. officials say Abu al-Umaryan was killed in a drone strike in Syria over the weekend, along with several other jihadists. The terror leader was linked to the beheading of Peter Kasich in 2014. Kasich was captured while working as an aid worker in Syria. And President Trump signaling progress with China following the G20 summit. The president tweeting, quote, China has agreed to reduce and remove tariffs on cars coming into China from the U.S. Currently, the tariff is 40%. The U.S. and China agreed to a truce in their tit-for-tat trade war over the weekend in Buenos Aires. The news is expected to boost stocks today. Dow futures are already surging over 480 points. And a massive manhunt is underway for a convicted murderer who posed as his cellmate to get out of jail. Get this, authorities say Patrick Walker threatened his cellmate to get his ID, then pretended to be him to get bailed out of an Oklahoma jail. Walker was serving a life sentence for a 2001 murder and awaiting a hearing on charges he assaulted a guard. And President Trump condemning anti-Semitism this Hanukkah. He writes in part, Jews today continue to face many different forms of violence, hatred, and bigotry around the globe. The president also offered support to the victims of the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. Last night, hundreds gathered for the special menorah lighting while honoring the 11 victims killed that deadly day in October. And on the first night of Hanukkah in Washington, Secretary of Interior Ryan Zinke lit the national menorah at the White House. Take a look at that. And those are your top headlines, guys. I'll send it back to you.
A busy day. All right. Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Meanwhile, take a look at this. The video. Scary. A fleeing driver smashes into a police cruiser right in front of another officer.
The road is going to be Gulf Trace 19.
Oh! What we just learned about that driver, we're going to tell you coming up.
And now that President Trump has called a trade truce with China, what happens next? What our next guest calls it, an early Christmas gift for our economy. For now.
Ceasefire.
President Trump has agreed to a 90-day ceasefire to hash out trade negotiations with China. And the president tweeted something else out overnight that nobody'd heard about. He writes, China has agreed to reduce tariffs on cars coming into China from the U.S. Currently, the tariff is 40%. That is a gigantic headline. What's that all about? Let's talk to Christian Whitten. He's a former State Department senior advisor in the Trump and George W. Bush administrations and author of Smart Power Between Diplomacy and War. And he joins us right now. Christian, good morning to you.
Morning.
This is a headline, if true.
If true, right. This is a problem with this agreement. There's a lot of vagueness. It's more aspirational, I think, than real. The Chinese have said they've agreed conceptually, as they have twice before in the Trump presidency, to lower tariffs, to talk about trade, to get through some of these things. I didn't see anything, especially on their side, about an agreement to lower car tariffs, but maybe that will happen in this 90-day period.
You don't trust the Chinese at the table, do you?
No, they've had decades of experience with lying and duplicity. And again, twice in this administration, the Mar-a-Lago summit, and then earlier this year in March, they offered the same type of framework and the same basket of goodies. They're going to come and buy a bunch of our exports. Right. And it turned out to not be real.
Because you think the Chinese, who have the long view, they're just going to wait him out. They think this guy can't get reelected, and the next guy is going to be a pushover.
I think so. It's not even so much the long view. It's who they have on their payroll, which is sort of elite opinion makers and Wall Street investment bankers who are very happy with this deal, who are telling them that Trump is an aberration. They see, frankly, this agreement perhaps as a sign of weakness, a 90-day delay in tariffs that were set to go up on January 1. And they think this buys the 90 days. And also, the 90 days is endeavor to complete within 90 days. This could run longer, and you can bet Wall Street will want it to go longer.
Well, let's take a look at what we do know about in this 90-day deal. A 90-day truce to negotiate some sort of a trade deal. Excuse me. Then Trump will delay raising the tariffs on $200 billion in Chinese goods. China to buy a substantial amount of U.S. products, a lot of ag stuff, which is great. If no deal is set after 90 days, the tariffs get jacked up to 25%. And the Chinese hate that idea.
They do, although that also should be seen as measured, because tariffs on only about half of Chinese imports are at 10% now. There's a small tranche at 25, but 10. But that's kind of fake, because even though that raises the prices 10%, China has devalued its currency in the last 6 months by 8%. So it's essentially no tariff now.
So where are we right now?
Where are we is I think the president in this agreement may have undercut an emerging strategic vision that we were going to be much tougher on China militarily and economically that was articulated by Vice President Pence at a speech at the Hudson Institute and again at APEC. Right now, the Chinese, I think they've won one. And President Trump, I think he will be tough, and I hope at the end of 90 days he is tough if the Chinese haven't done anything. But there's a real risk there that this turns into a read my lips moment where a president is seen to be ignoring a fundamental promise he made to voters. And Wall Street is not going to get Donald Trump reelected. The people who expect more manufacturing jobs in America are going to do that.
Well, let's see what happens right now. The futures are up 400 or 500 points based on the tweet earlier this.
Wall Street is happy.
All right, Christian, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, meanwhile, Lee Greenwood, the singer, traveled all across the country with President George Herbert Walker Bush and performed God Bless the USA at his inauguration. He joins us live to remember 41. A Fox News alert, the Trump administration expected to meet with Mexican officials later today to start to discuss the migrant crisis at the border. It comes as officials in Tijuana, Mexico, shut down one giant shelter because of the unsanitary conditions that we've been telling you about. Griff Jenkins is live in Tijuana with the very latest. Griff.
Hey, good morning, guys. You know, we're about 10 miles south of the border now. Take a look at this video. It's dark in there now, but here's what we shot yesterday. It's more spacious. It's got concrete floors, better situation because the old one, of course, had the mud and it was cramped. There was 6,000 people in a 1,000 space. They had lice infestation and everybody was sick in there. But here at the new one, there's only about 3,000 of the 6,000, which means there's a lot of unaccounted migrants here. Meanwhile, this is as Mexico got its new president, AMLO as he's known, and he sent his foreign minister, Marcelo Ebrard, to meet with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to discuss their shared commitment to address their common challenges. One of those challenges is the criminal element in this migrant caravan. And I asked one of the organizers for Pueblo Sin Fronteras yesterday what his message was for Trump and what he's doing about the criminals in it. He says he doesn't know where they are. Listen.
Let these people in. Just let them try. Let them try. I mean, most of these people are not bad. We don't know what if they part of a gang member, or if they gang members or not, because they hide.
Now it's all eyes on the meetings in Washington to see if they come up with a solution that would likely involve keeping the migrants here in Mexico while asylum applications play out. Guys,
let's see what happens. All right, Griff, thank you very much. Ainsley, Brian, over to you.
All right, thank you. Lee Greenwood sang his iconic song, Proud to be an American, at President Trump's 2017 inauguration. But that's not the only president that he's performed for.
Wow, there you go. That was the moment. There's the man. Here now to share his memories of President H.W. Bush, 41, his country singer legend, Lee Greenwood. Lee, as we were playing, I don't know, were you able to see on the monitor what was happening? So can you reset the scene for us? with Ford
Yeah, that's,
and President Bush in the background?
Absolutely. That's in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and we were on tour campaigning for George Herbert Walker Bush to become president. I first met him at a command performance at the White House when Reagan was president, and I kind of figured he would be president. And it was such a warm and genuine relationship that I had with him. There were many times on the campaign trail we would do things kind of spontaneously, like sometimes you have to do. But it was always wonderful working with him as a speaker, because he would speak and then I would sing, and it kind of worked that way every time.
I know y'all been friends for a very long time. The last time you saw him was in Kennebunkport in August. Tell us that story about singing the song at his piano.
Yeah, my wife and I, Kim, had the chance to visit with him in Kennebunkport. And we had some business that took us kind of east. You don't just fall into Maine. You have to go there. And so they allowed us in the compound. Had a moment to sit at the piano and play him a song or two. And I did actually play a little version of God Bless USA, and he would sing along with me, as I know he's done with other people, particularly just before his death. And it was a very warm and gentle. They called all the Secret Service people in to sit behind us and kind of listen as well. He was generally interested to talk to me and just kind of relive some of the moments we'd had in the past.
You also said that he was so kind to your sons Dalton and Parker, sent notes upon their birth through their graduations.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, you know, to have a note from the president and say, by the way, can I be excused this afternoon because I have a note from the president? It's like, really?
You called him the most generous patriot. Tell us why you think he was the most generous person.
You know, just to the point where something simple like, here, take my cufflinks. I mean, he had a genuine heart about giving to other people. Remember one time we were on the campaign trail in a motorcade, and I'm sitting next to the window, and he's on my left. And as we're leaving most of the crowd, there was one man standing on the curb. He leaned across me as we opened the window and waved at him, and the man waved back. And he said, that's how you win an election, one person at a time. And that's the way he dealt with you. It was one person at a time, get eye contact. And generally the case when you would meet him on any occasion, he would kind of give you a big hug like he's a member of the family. And it made you feel like you were a member of his family.
Yeah, it's just amazing, too. It only works if you mean it. If you look that person in the eye and you wave to them and you want that, you want more than their vote, but you care about them, that's when it comes through. You can't do it mechanical or with your objective to getting their vote. You got to care about people. He did, and that's what came through. Also extremely humble. Lee Grinwood, thanks so much.
Thank you, Lee.
Great. It's been a busy week here.
No kidding. All right. Meanwhile, 31 minutes before the top of the hour.
Dan Bongino is here to discuss President H.W. Bush as well and his relationship with the Secret Service, plus reaction from Congresswoman Liz Cheney and Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton coming up. First president of the United States, George H.W. Bush.
Right and proper that a nation's leader take an interest in the nation's character.
The mission was not George H.W. Bush. The mission was, how do we serve the United States?
Well, in just a few hours, the casket-carrying George Herbert Walker Bush will be flown on what is commonly known as Air Force One to Washington, D.C. The late president will lie in state right in the center of the Capitol Rotunda.
All right, President Trump has declared Wednesday a national day of mourning for President Bush. He will be buried in Texas later in the week. So I almost feel like we went through this a couple of times between the passing of Barbara Bush and then the passing of John McCain. There's a big, almost a reflective mood in the country 3 times in the last 6 months of, wow, what were we thinking then? What shaped them to who they became? Because 3 extraordinary people.
And one thing that is different is John McCain's family did not invite President Trump to the funeral, and the president will be in attendance in Florida. I met George Herbert Walker Bush close to 40 years ago. I was in Iowa, and I was covering the Iowa caucuses. He was the CIA director, you know, and I covered his inauguration. I covered the Bush years and the Reagan years. That's actually from 2009 at one of the Celebration for Reading events down in Florida. And it was the first time a president, and keep in mind, he was out of office, he called me Steve, and I thought, the president knows my name. And it was the coolest thing. And he, so humble, so earnest, so gentle, so kind. He was a great guy.
I met him a couple of times in person. Number one, after the tsunami, when he came together with Bill Clinton, they appeared at the Super Bowl. And I had a chance to talk to both of them at the same time. And the one thing that stood out, we're trying to find the tape, this is a different point. We're trying to find the tape. Is that he said, you know, if Hillary decides to run against my, Bill Clinton was giving it to 43. He goes, but if Hillary tries to run, he goes, don't be surprised if I give some of it back. Those pictures, we can put them back up. Right before the president came out to do the coin flip at the Super Bowl in Houston, something he was determined to do, I was able to get there, stand right next to him, talk to him for a little bit before he went out. He was that ovation that he got, and I covered 18 Super Bowls. It was as big as any ovation that I have heard because it kept growing as it became clear what was happening. There was an announcement, and before they made the announcement that Barbara and George Bush were coming out, the place went absolutely crazy.
Well, he was 94 years old. He had the distinct honor of being the longest-lived president in American history. And I remember covering when Tony Snow passed away, his spokesperson. I was anchoring Fox and Friends. I believe it was the weekend show. And we got a call. Our producers were talking in our ears saying the president is on the phone. President Bush and Barbara Bush are on the phone. And they said, we're in bed, we're having our coffee, we're watching Fox and Friends, and we just learned about Tony Snow's passing by watching your show. And I had the same thought. Wow, they watch Fox and Friends. That's really such an honor for all of us. Let's bring in Dan Bongino, also served our country, a great serviceman, former NYPD officer and Secret Service agent. What is the Secret Service? How is he remembered amongst those men and women?
You know, Ainsley, I can remember a story when I was on President Bush, the younger, 43's detail, when obviously when he was the president, and we took a trip up to Kennebunkport. You know, the family would hang out, and it was the mixing of these two details, right? You have the presidential detail, which is this enormous footprint, and then George H.W. Bush's detail, which over time, it shrinks corresponding to the security threat. And I remember when I went up there, it was interesting, because it was my first time. Some of the posts, the security posts, are a good distance from our security room. So I said to one of the guys, I'd been new, I'm on the president's detail, I'm not on the former detail. I said, how do we get to these posts? He said, just grab one of the bikes. I said, well, those aren't our bikes, those are the family's bikes. And the guy says to me, I'll never forget, he says, no, they don't mind, they love us here, just grab one of their bikes. So that's what we did. And I'll never forget the way the guys on that detail, they spoke about George H.W. Timberwolf was his code name. I mean, it's not secret anymore. The Secret Service tweeted out the other day. In this avuncular fashion, it was almost like they were protecting their dad or their uncle. I mean, they really, really loved this man. I mean, it was personal. It wasn't, believe me, the security was as tight as possible. Right. But it was personal for them. They really loved this guy. And I'll tell you, we're not going to find a more deep and rich, character-laden president in modern times than George H.W.
Even the staff
Bush.
of the White House says the same thing about him.
Indeed. All right. Dan, we're going to be covering him all week long. We're going to talk about something else in the news. Griff was telling us about the very latest on the shelter situation down in Tijuana. There's a headline on FoxNews.com. DeRoy Murdoch wrote a new column and said Central American migrants should caravan to Panama. And the logic behind this is the nations they're coming from are so poor, but Panama has like 3 or 4 times their GDP. He says, despite the bleedings of the no borders crowd, America need not welcome anyone and everyone who barges in rather than the North. Guatemalans, Hondurans, Salvadorans should caravan south to Panama. It's the wealthiest country between the U.S. and Colombia, so maybe these folks should seek better lives there. What do you think about that idea?
Well, DeRoy's idea is going to expose mass hypocrisy on the left, and here's why, Steve. We know now, just from interviews of people on the ground and from historical results of asylum seekers, that most of the people coming here are not, in fact, coming here for asylum. Some are, but not all. We know that because a lot of people's asylum claims are rejected. Matter of fact, the overwhelming majority are. Most people are coming here for economic opportunity. Now, how does that lead into the hypocrisy on the left? Well, the left, I'm not talking about all Democrats. I'm talking about the far left has done nothing over the past 30 or 40 years but bash capitalism as a means for economic prosperity. So you can't have it both ways. Either people in countries that don't practice capitalism are coming here for capitalism's opportunities, or they're not. So when you say to them, well, why are they coming here? Oh, they're coming here from economic opportunity. Why? Because we're the freest country on earth. Then why are you bashing our economic system? This is the kind of piece that exposes them if you get them on the record to answer. DeRoy's right. If it's It's about economic opportunity. Panama is closer and probably has some opportunities there as well. But the left won't admit that. That's why, Steve, they constantly focus on, oh, they're coming here for asylum. Some are. Most of them are not.
Get a deal going. I thought it was some great points. Get the southern border of Mexico reinforced. They won't have a problem at their northern border, and we won't have one on our southern border. Get Mexico involved in this and get Congress to do something before this lame duck session is done. Make them come together in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, then we're going to have to, Brian. I mean, listen, chaos is not a policy, okay?
Well, that wraps up this hour of Fox and Friends First. Have a great day. Fox and Friends First continues right now. Bye-bye.
All right, it is Monday, December 3rd, and remembering a hero. Just hours from now, the casket of former President George H.W. Bush will arrive in Washington, D.C., his service dog, Sully, refusing to leave his side.
Just look at that. The final farewell wishes to the 41st president set for today. And meeting with Mexico, can the U.S. hammer out a deal to stop the growing caravan crisis?
Yeah, the sit-down that's set for today is a big one as conditions worsen right there at the border.
Can we turn our beds into bunk beds? Yes. And here's the thing, it'll give us so much extra space in our room to do activities. Please say yes.
You don't need permission from us to build bunk beds. You're adults. You can do what you want.
You haven't seen that movie. That's a great movie. And the shocking number of millennials who still live with mom and dad.
But those two not millennials.
No,
let's be
they're
clear.
A little too old for that.
Fox and Friends First continues right now. And good morning. You are watching Fox and Friends First on this Monday morning. I'm Carly Shimkus in for Jillian Neely.
And I'm Rob Schmidt. Thanks for getting up early with us today. And a live look now at Capitol Hill this morning, where the country begins to say its final goodbyes to our 41st president. The casket of George H.W. Bush will make its way on Air Force One to Washington, D.C. to lie in the state rotunda.
And his beloved service dog, Sully, accompanying Bush 41 for the last time. Casey Stiegel is live in Houston with how the late president will be honored this week. Good morning, Casey.
Carly, Rob, good morning to you. Yeah, you know, this plan really has been in the works for years, and now it is just being executed, and it really is a well-oiled machine. Later this morning, the family will be gathering at the funeral home here in Houston behind me, where they will then motorcade to nearby Ellington Field, and that is where Air Force One is waiting. We want to show you a picture of that now. Typically, it's called Air Force One when the president is on board. Today, it'll technically be called Special Air Mission 41. Once arriving at Joint Base Andrews around 3:30 Eastern Time, the former president will be taken to the U.S. Capitol building, where he will lie in state ahead of Wednesday's big state funeral at National Cathedral.
I feel really good about people if they analyze not only his accomplishments, but his character. They'll say, job well done, George H.W. Bush.
And of course, everyone just cannot stop talking about this picture. Get your tissue. Sully, the president's service dog, a little bit about him. He's a yellow lab seen here at the funeral home, keeping watch over the casket. We've learned that Sully H.W. Bush, his full name, by the way, will also be traveling with the family. He's family, of course, to D.C. The president wanted him to go back into service to help another military family, and we understand that is going to happen and that he could potentially be put to work at Walter Reed Medical Center. So Sully will continue to help others as he has President Bush here in his final moments. So that is the latest here from Houston. A very big day, lots of stuff scheduled. We're going to stay on top of it and have all of it for you here on Fox News, guys.
Absolutely.
That's a beautiful picture. All right, Casey, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
That is.
President Trump is considering pushing back the looming government shutdown in the wake of President George H.W. Bush's death. He is willing to sign a 2-week federal budget extension to give Congress more time to hammer out a spending bill. Republicans are fighting for $5 billion to fund the southern border wall.
And speaking of that, meanwhile, Mexican officials are in Washington this morning to work out a solution to the migrant crisis at the border.
Yeah, this as Mexican authorities are opening a new shelter in Tijuana with thousands of people living in very unsanitary conditions. And that's where we find Griff Jenkins, who continues our coverage there from the border with the very latest this morning. Hey, Griff.
Rob and Carly, good morning. Yeah, we're about 10 miles south of the border, and we are in the new shelter. Take a look at this video we shot yesterday. You'll see that there's more space there. It's a better conditions. They've got a concrete floor, and they're getting fed there. But here's the thing. Only about 3,000 of the total 6,000 are in here, meaning 3,000 may be unaccounted for. They had to leave, of course, the old shelter because of the unsanitary conditions, because of the mud. And this, of course, does not alleviate the fact that they had widespread respiratory infections and lice infestations amongst its populations. Meanwhile, Mexico did inaugurate a new president, AMLO as he's known, and he sent his foreign minister, Marcelo Ebrard, to meet with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to, quote, discuss shared commitment to address our common challenges and opportunities, according to State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert. Congressman Bob Goodlatte taken to the airways yesterday on Fox, saying it's time for a deal. Listen.
We need an agreement with Mexico, and we need our laws changed. This is not a situation that's any better for Mexico than it is for the United States. So they ought to work together to work it out.
One big concern is that whether or not this migrant group will try and rush that border again like we saw a week ago Sunday. But the organizer with Pueblos Sin Fronteras that's behind me in this shelter said he's not worried about that right now. They learned a lesson. Take a listen.
These people already learned. They already learned their lesson. See, they know that they can't just get in through the United States, forcing the gates open, because it's not gonna happen. They got to do it legally.
Now we wait to find out whether or not there will be anything that comes of the meetings between the new Mexican administration and the Trump administration. The agreement that we hope to get, that the administration wants to get, is that these migrants will continue to stay here in Mexico while they play out their asylum. Guys.
Yeah. That's right. We'll be talking a little bit about that deal later on, analyzing what the implications there are and if it could happen and all that. Thank you so much, Griff. We appreciate it. All right. Meanwhile, President Trump isn't backing down on his border wall despite continued pushback from the left.
According to Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce, Congress was able to scrape together $150 billion to seal the Iran deal. So why can't they find a fraction of that for border security?
And what you also wouldn't have is the chaos that keeps everyone distracted and is not looking at maybe other specific things that Congress is doing, allows for partisan arguments on both sides to keep people divided. It almost serves as the perfect distraction to keep Americans from noticing the nature of the condition of Congress. Here's one thing I know. Somehow, Barack Obama found $150 billion to give to Iran. Right. We don't know if there was a printer or if it came from, some hologram machine. They sent they found $150 billion to give to a terrorist sponsoring nation, as our State Department recognizes it. But they can't quite find $5 billion for the wall.
Well, the border wall is also causing a rift among Democrats, with some in the House accusing Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of softening to the president's calls for funding.
Surprising thing there. All right, overnight, President Trump signaling progress with China following the G20 summit. The president tweeting, quote, China has agreed to reduce and remove tariffs on cars coming into China from the U.S. Currently, the tariff is 40%. Now, over the weekend, the U.S. and China agreed to a truce in their tit-for-tat trade war. President Trump said he would not impose new tariffs or raise current ones on January 1st, as he previously suggested. The news is expected to boost stocks today. Dow futures already surging well over 450 points overnight.
Well, a very special start to Hanukkah this year at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Hundreds gathered for a special menorah lighting last night to mark the holiday and also to honor the 11 victims killed in that deadly October attack. President Trump again condemning anti-Semitism, writing in part, quote, Jews today continue to face many different forms of violence, hatred, and bigotry around the globe. As one nation, we pledge our continued love and support for the victims, their families, and the community, and we pray that the victims' families find some measure of peace and comfort during the holiday season.
And December tornadoes tearing through a naval submarine base in Georgia, despite the path of destruction at the Kings Bay base. Luckily, no serious injuries have been reported.
Yeah, some wild weather going on. The Midwest cleaning up after more than a dozen very late season twisters touched down in several states over the weekend. One person was killed in Missouri. Senior meteorologist Janice Dean is tracking the latest. It's weird to talk about this during Christmas time.
Yeah, I mean, it can happen.
Yeah.
We can have tornadoes any month of the year, but we certainly had an outbreak because we had this powerful cold front sweeping across the eastern half of the country. And you can see the current temperatures, and it's 54 here in New York. Ahead of that front, it's warm. I mean, relatively speaking, across the East Coast. We're almost done with this storm system. But yes, we saw dozens of reports of tornadoes as well as strong winds. We saw reports of hail and a lot of snow, almost a blizzard across portions of the Midwest and the northern plains and the Great Lakes. So right now, we're almost done with this system. We're going to see some nuisance snow, some nuisance rain with this, and then that cold front sweeps through the East Coast.